What's up, everybody? Welcome into the first edition, Ethan, of player previews for the 2023-2024 NBA season. How excited are you to just be talking about this upcoming season with Victor Wembanyama on the roster, Ethan?
Dude, I'm so excited that I've been rewatching over and over and over again everyone's highlights from last season, as well as going through every interview, every clip I could scour off the World Wide Web. Jude, I am pumped. I'm ready to go. How about you? How you feeling?
It's funny you mentioned that because I feel like a couple weeks back, I did the same thing. Like all the
Yeah.
player highlights full from
Mhm.
2022, 2023. I went
Yep.
back and watched those. And that just gets you excited because you can, obviously they're highlights, but at
Mhm.
the same time, when you factor in the context of last season, as we talk about so much on the show, Ethan, it's important to remind yourself that, hey, they did those things in those highlights. And when you look at those highlights, obviously any NBA mixtape is going to be pretty good, but still, there's a lot of good things individually in the mess that was last season that happened. So hopefully this year we can start to gel a little bit and put all those good things meshing together in that Spurs way, Ethan.
1000%. Wemby helps.
Wemby does help a lot,
Wemby
but
helps.
you know what also helps, Ethan?
What's that?
Having a point guard that knows the Spurs system. And even
Yes.
though we're not sure on who that's going to be yet, when it comes
True.
to the starting lineup, we know for a fact that at some point and in some capacity, Tre Jones will be running the point guard position for the San Antonio Spurs. So I got a couple things that I wrote down here, Ethan.
Mhm.
I'll just start off with his improvements and then I'll dish it to you. So I
Go
kind of
ahead.
just wrote down three things that I want to see from Tre. Obviously, we'll get into his strengths later, but just to start off with improvements, number one is shooting. That's something that everybody talks about. I'm specifically talking about 3-point shooting here. We know he's a pretty solid shooter from the mid range. And we saw a slight improvement last season, which is still good to see because any progress is still progress. But you just like to see that continue, maybe,
Mhm.
just inch closer to that 35% mark, just to be an above average, shooter from outside, not just where, okay, if I'm wide open, I'm going to drain it. Now, like if I just have a little bit of space, like it's becoming, a little bit more consistent. I don't think
Mhm.
Tre Jones is ever going to be an automatic shooter, but I would just like to see, once again, a little steady uptick in his shooting. The second thing I have is consistency on floaters and finishing. Obviously, we know he has that in his game. That's something, in the ways really when it comes to his offensive game, Ethan, those are the things that he likes to do the most, I think, whenever it comes to just his scoring prowess, which is why the
Mhm.
first reason was improving his 3-point shooting. But still, at times, sometimes the floaters can just be a little bit off, or even at the rim, he'll be in the right position, but he just won't execute. He won't finish the play. And obviously, we're being super nitpicky here
Mhm.
because of the context of this team. Like when we remember Tre Jones is 23 years old, he probably should still be working on getting consistent with his floaters and finishing. That is
Mhm.
something that I would like to see next season. And then the third and final thing was just shot creation. I wrote down also in parentheses here, this isn't necessarily needed, but just to pick something else that I could see from him whenever it comes to his improvements, because he's already a pretty solid defender. Just creating some plays, in a situation where maybe he has the ball in his hands with 7 seconds left. I've seen him, I think, make, a little bit of an off the dribble jumper in the mid range before, like late in the shot clock, but really I haven't seen too much from that realm. Obviously, you don't want, there's a lot of other guys that you would rather have, in a shot creation situation than Tre Jones. But like I said, to pick something here, that was my third thing I put down. What are the things that you want to see Tre Jones improve on this year?
I think you hit all of them right on the head. I think by far and away the most important one is shooting. And you mentioned it. He has improved from year to year. He has some better mechanics. We saw it last year. And from time to time, we saw an increased willingness to at least attempt a shot. But his numbers are still low. Everyone knows that's the biggest weakness of his game. So if he can get to 33 or 35%, have kind of a Patrick Beverly type improvement from that area of his game, then he becomes a completely different player. The rest of his game opens up, and he can play off the ball and suddenly become
Yeah.
even more versatile. He's not just a point guard; he can be an off guard. He can play alongside Blake Wesley, even other guys that can create off the dribble. And I agree with your finishing thing, but I would say creating in the in between as slightly more important, only because once when he gets in that in between area, you're right. He's really only going to pass the ball, and he becomes very one dimensional. If he can get a 1-2 dribble pull up game in his game, kind of like Chris Paul, I think that opens up everything else for him.
That's a really good comparison there, Ethan. That's something I feel like he could add to his game with
Mhm.
just like his skill set he has right now. That kind of that Chris Paul mid range. Obviously, not saying he's going to get
Yeah.
there this season, but that is like something reminiscent of that could
Mhm.
could be really that could just be really good for him in just adding to his offensive game. But also when you talked about his shooting, that's another thing that I didn't think about, him playing off the ball, the versatility that would add. And it kind of just reminds me of a comparison we've made the entire time, Ethan. And you
Mhm.
know what I'm about to say. It
Yep.
just reminds you of Tyus Jones. I
Yes, it
mean, that's
does.
literally, he's mainly a playmaker, but he can be versatile. You can put him in the corner because he is a good shooter. Obviously he's a good off ball mover as well. And he's also got a little bit of mid range, kind of similar to Chris Paul as well. So, I mean, we want him to be Tre Jones, but we also kind of want him to be a little bit more like his brother.
There's nothing wrong with being more like your brother, Jude. It's just an improvement in his game. Like I think he
Right.
has some things better than Tyus Jones. I think he's more physical. I think he's a more
Right.
well endowed field general. I think it's just more of like a natural thing for him than Tyus maybe. But Tyus is obviously a better scorer. So if you could just blend
Right.
those two strengths, I think we'd have a really difficult time arguing against him being the starting point guard next year.
That's very true, Ethan. That's very true. Looking at some of the strengths, though, some of the things that he already does well, obviously, we touched on a little bit of this already, but just to highlight some of the things that I wrote down, playmaking and facilitating, obviously,
Mhm.
as you just referenced, that comes very natural to him. He's a solid defender. I'm not saying he's going to be like Gary Payton, but he's an above average defender for someone his age in the NBA. I mean, sometimes maybe at the rim, if he's playing against Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, he's going to get beat because there's a height disadvantage. But for the most part, he's always giving effort, and he has while he isn't the biggest guy, he has a physical frame, kind of like you said when you referenced him being a little bit more physical than Tyus. So he definitely tries to put his chest, into the guys he's guarding. So I really can't ask for too much more from Tre on defense, other than whatever the Spurs front office, or not front office, but whatever the coaching staff is saying in practice that I don't know. And then the
Mhm.
third thing for his strengths is just he's just a high IQ player. He
Mhm.
he he doesn't make mistakes. I mean, when he does, they're very minimal, and they're also not that impactful either. So yeah, Tre Jones is somebody who his IQ would be what you would expect as someone who was a point guard at Duke under Coach K.
Yes, yes. I think you hit it again right on the head. High IQ, great facilitator, avoids mistakes, scrappy defender, good help defense IQ. The thing that I think is the most valuable about Tre Jones is something that I don't actually know how to define. It's not measurable, but when he doesn't play, our team is completely lost on the court.
Very
And we
good
saw
point.
that. I don't know how I don't know what statistical category that would fall under, Jude, but his
It wouldn't
importance,
fall under a statistical
yeah,
category.
his
It'd just be the
importance is
tape.
just yeah, watch the tape, watch the games, and that stretch where he was injured and wasn't playing, and Malachi was going through his growth of trying to become a playmaker and trying to handle the ball as well as Jeremy Sohan taking on some of those responsibilities. It was difficult basketball to watch on both ends of the court.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that stretch in so many lives and post games throughout the season, man. When we look
Hmm.
back on that one, and we still forget about it. I forget about it. You bring it up right here, and it's just another example of that. That is a great representation of Tre Jones's impact. Go watch when he wasn't on the floor at the beginning of the year this season, and you will see the drop off, literally
Hmm.
game to game. Like the last game he played in versus the next one, you'll be like, ooh, oh my God, our offensive
Rough.
sets are nowhere.
Hmm.
I can't imagine what it was like to be in those pop sessions. Good Lord.
Yeah.
But I also wrote down some overall thoughts, Ethan. So I'm just going to read this out to you, and then I'll let you kind of spin off what you have to think about it. Interested to see where he fits in the rotation. Like much of the roster, his life will be easier with Wemby. I would like to see some more consistency in the things he does well scoring wise, kind of like what we talked about. Um, Low mistake player who you can trust to do his job, somebody you want on your team guy.
Yeah, I mean, all great points. The thing I'm looking forward to the most from him overall this season is just kind of seeing if he's going to be a stable, like, how do I want to put this? If per the rotation that Pop chooses this year, we will clearly see like the direction he wants to move forward in this team. right? So like who he plays in crunch time, will it be Wemby at center, power forward, whatever it may be, Jeremy at point guard? Will Tre be involved in that, or will he become more of a okay? The other guys, they're struggling. They can't put the ball in the hole. It's a 10-0 run the opposite direction. Timeout. Tre, go restore order, and he'll
Kind of like Patty,
kind of like Patty.
and his last, his later years with the Spurs.
Exactly. And in a way, it's kind of like preparing him even for an eventual backup point guard spot. Like if we really do think the plan is to draft or sign whatever a young point guard to kind of lead the helm moving forward, then Trey would become the backup, and he would basically be that mentor-ish role that would come in those instances where we need a veteran presence. So
Yeah.
I'm interested to see if that's kind of where we push him toward, especially if Blake Wesley plays. We'll see that probably in the second half of the season.
I think where he fits rotationally, like you said, is just going to answer that question.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're curious about because, say just for the sake of conversation, right? If
Hmm.
Trey's starting, maybe that's an indication that, you know, he's a part of the future moving forward. They might see him as a starting point guard for this team
Yeah.
moving forward. I don't think that it necessarily means it for certain either, but it would indicate that more. Where say they just go out with Malachi at the point, then you can kind of see where the ball is falling a little bit. Because think about it. I mean, is it really crazy? I mean, there's a lot of lineups that aren't that crazy with the Spurs team just because of the nature of everything. But a Malachi Branham, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Sohan, Wembanyama lineup isn't really that far out of the question, especially when you factor in the fact that Malachi got reps as a combo guard at Ohio State and last year in San Antonio. Now, we're going to have to, once again, we could sit here and speculate forever, as we've said on so many episodes, and we're going to have to wait until training camp to find that out. But, I think that conversation is definitely a legitimate one, just as we're
Hmm.
sitting here on August 30th. 2023, because with the way Malachi played last year and his versatility, you could argue it. Well, I don't think it's unquestionable. Those are the top 5 Spurs. We just did our podcast on the top 5 Spurs recently, and those were the 5 guys that were there. Unquestionably, it probably feels like those guys are the 5 guys with the highest ceiling.
Hmm.
Is that what you want to build around Wembanyama? It kind of seems like that would be a feasible thing, a reasonable thing to assume. But also, you might want Malachi's scoring presence off the bench as well, which I could totally see the appeal of that as well, especially when you have Devin and Keldon in the starting lineup. But
Hmm.
in the nature, when you get a Wembanyama, everything is just kind of out of the picture. They're going to do what they think is best, I think, to surround him,
Hmm.
regardless of how it makes people feel.
Agreed. There's also the whole angle of will Wemby play center or power forward? Most people think power forward because of what Pop said about Zach, but we don't want to open up that can of worms, Jude. I will just sit here and say I agree with everything that you just said, and we can move on.
We'll definitely talk about that at
Hmm.
some point, Ethan. But any final thoughts on Tre Jones before we end this one?
I've been on the bandwagon since we drafted him. Look back at my Twitter when we watched him in the G League when he was a two-way guy. I've been on Tre Jones, so I want him to do well. He's my favorite player. So Tre, if you're watching this, please for me, just give me a shout out one of these days.
For Ethan, look. Ethan was a big Austin Spurs fan when
I was.
he was deep in the Austin Spurs tape when Tre was there. Trust.
Tre Jones is my Dominic Barlow for Jude. Jude was watching
There,
Dom.
this is yes,
That Tre was my guy.
exactly. When I was watching Overtime Elite, you were watching the Austin Spurs.
Exactly.
That should tell our viewers what they need to know. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe below. If you want to follow us on Twitter to stay updated with the show, you can at SSPN on YT, at Jude McLaren, and at Ethan_Quintero. And of course, if you would ever like to go buy some SSPN merch, go ahead and scan this QR code. And if you have some trouble finding it, you don't have your phone on you, just go hit the link in our bio on YouTube. SSPN.myspreadshop.com, I believe, is also the URL, if that helps as well. We appreciate you guys. We'll catch y'all in the next one, and we'll see y'all later.